Okay, I'll be back just now. Huh? Just want to quickly go to the bathroom. Almost walked right past my class. Okay. All right. So let's get into it. So like I said, I want us to start off by actually delving into or jumping into Learning Unit 4. Then once we've gone through the theory side of Learning Unit 4, then we'll just touch base on question 3.5. I looked at it and I realized actually we don't need to actually actively do it. But you did it for homework, right? Did I give it to you for homework? 3.5. I think I did. So we'll just discuss that and then we'll call it a day. So when I see you on Thursday, because I'm not seeing you tomorrow, then we will look at your test and then probably look at maybe 1 or 2 exercises in Learning Unit 4. And then Friday, same thing. Those will be there, will be in Learning Unit 4. So by the end of next week, we definitely will be done with Learning Unit 4, I think. And then the week after, we'll see how we'll manage it, because obviously there's revision that we want to do, and then obviously see if we want to get into any new content. But jumping into Learning Unit 4. Learning Unit 4 is pretty much revision. I think there might be 1 or 2 new stuff for you guys, but most of it is revision. And what you're really looking at there is your working capital and working capital management, all right? Here, they're particularly looking at your current assets, okay? And then I think it might be the next learning unit where they start looking at current liabilities, okay? Very interesting that they separated those, because I mean, both your current assets and your current liabilities, as you can see here on the second point, it makes up, yes, your working capital. Okay, so here it says working capital is an essential component of a company's capital structure and is used to service its daily operational requirements. The moment you think working capital, you must be thinking your operations, okay? Funding your operations, all right? And then it goes on to tell us that working capital is made up of the following current assets. So you got inventories, and as you guys learned in second year, inventory is not just, the product that we put on the shelf, but it's also those raw materials that we use to make our final product. Is the work in progress, and then obviously the finished goods that we are selling. Then trade receivables, this I'm sure we knew from our first year accounting, all your credit sales, other receivables, okay? So prepaid payments, accrued income, flashbacks of 1B. Then marketable securities, all right? So cash and other highly liquid investments, cash equivalents. I know you guys learned about this last semester, isn't it? Right? So net working capital reflects the difference between what a company owns and what it owes, all right, in terms of current assets and current liabilities, all right? Current liabilities are companies' obligations due within 12 months of a company's operating cycle. Okay, so nothing really new there on that slide. Now here, the objective of working capital management, okay? You guys must be able to speak to these. These are the type of things that they could very well bring in a test or an exam. To ensure that the business has sufficient working capital resources to maintain operations and facilitate growth. Okay, so it's not just about maintaining your operations, but also facilitating growth. Okay, then to maintain investment in working capital at a required minimum cost to improve profitability. Okay, so here now we're now talking about investing in your inventory, all right, such that you can obviously improve your profitability. Okay, so then it goes on to say to have a required level of liquid resources available for continuous operations and increased profits. You never want to not have your stock on the shelf, because obviously you may very well lose a sale if a customer comes to your shop and cannot purchase that which they intended to. Then it's going to be problems. You might have lost the sale forever. Then overcapitalization. Okay, what is this all about? It occurs when a company holds excessive amounts of inventories, account receivables, or cash, and limited holdings of accounts receivable. Oh, sorry, accounts payable. Okay, so when you have more current assets than and limited holdings in your accounts payable. Let's unpack that. Is that what you wanted to ask? What do we mean when we say overcapitalization is when we have a whole lot more current assets than current liabilities? What are we basically saying?
The debt to pay you back.
Yeah.
And then you might need to pay a supplier, and if you don't have the physical cash on hand, you fall short of it, like, so. I don't think that's what this is going to.
Yes, not exactly referring to that. But you are, they are related to some degree. So when we're talking about overcapitalization, let's talk about capital. What is capital? In its simplest form. Its contributions from who? From owners, right? So when we say we are overcapitalized, we're basically saying we are funding this business excessively with our own money. Okay, so we're using money to get your inventories, to make sure we have cash, all right, available for obviously the running of the business and so on and so forth, meet expenditure and all that kind of stuff. And we have limited holdings and account payables. In other words, we are underutilizing accounts payables. Why is that problematic? Because it means that we are foregoing an opportunity to get funding from external sources and use less of our own money. Can you see why we use the term overcapitalization? Excessively using our own money. Okay, so that's how I would look at this term overcapitalization. Concerns having an overinvestment in current assets, which leads to a high level of working capital. Because think about it, we're basically saying that your current assets is very high, let's say 10,000, and your current liability is only 1,000. Can you see how your working capital is very, very high? Okay, so that's how I would then interpret that. And Nadia, you can go watch the recording to catch up on what I said. Okay, so symptoms of overcapitalization include, and I think this will also give us more perspective, a long accounts receivable collection period. So because you have a long accounts receivable collection period, it means that you have people who are owing us for long periods of time, which means that we're bound to have huge amounts of accounts receivables. And then a low inventory turnover rate and long inventory days on hand. So again, now it means that it takes forever for us to sell our inventory, which means that our money is getting caught up in trading inventory, all right, for long periods of time. And then high liquidity ratios. Okay, this is now when we're saying we have a lot of cash, which again is a current asset. So all of that becomes overcapitalization. Then over trading is now what you are speaking to and what we've discussed in accounting 2A, sorry, finance 2A, where we are now saying we have invested too much of our current assets into well, not just your current assets, but too much of our money is actually in our inventory. And sometimes we even go and borrow money to go and buy inventory. And then there's the risk that we may have liquidity problems along the way, because we might not turn over that trading inventory quick enough to meet our debt and pay our creditors, or just meet our daily operational expenditure, all right, or expenses. Then symptoms of overtrading, so rapid increase in sales, okay, on credit, rapid increase in inventory holdings, and a potential slowdown in inventory turnover. Rapid increase in accounts receivable balances and a rise in accounts receivable collection period. Okay, so accounts receivable collection period. Okay, we will obviously be trying to get more of our money back. So that's why you then say, it says, and a rise in accounts receivable collection period. Okay. Oh, no. Sorry, I'm misreading that. It means that it's being further extended. It's taking longer for us to get our money back. The more we borrow, the more people are going to default. Does that make sense? Because not everybody is going to pay you back. Let's say we had 10 people that we borrowed or we sold on credit to. Let me say that we sold on credit to. And 3 out of every 10 people defaults, okay? Or takes longer to pay back than we have agreed on our terms. So if we now start borrowing to 20 people, can you see we are also going to have a rise in the collection period for accounts receivable, because now we have more people in our average that we are calculating for our accounts receivable collection period, okay? So just to unpack that, okay? And then an increase in accounts payable days. Okay, so obviously, if our money is tied up in either inventory or accounts payable, we're also going to negotiate with our creditors to say, can we have more time to pay off? Outside of that, we will also take advantage of, even if we used to pay in 40 days when we could pay in 60, because we have more money tied up in inventory, all right? Or with our debtors, then we're going to say, hey, you know what, let's actually start paying maybe 50 days or the actual 60-day limit that we have. Okay, so just to unpack that, then the overdraft facility reaching its maximum limit. Okay, risk of overtrading ruins relationship with suppliers, ruins relationship with bankers, ruins relationships with customers. Why do we say it also then ruins relationships with customers? Over trading. If you guys are allowing me to take out more on credit, shouldn't it actually improve my relationship with you guys? Why do we say it ruins? Because bankers and suppliers or creditors is pretty straightforward.
takes advantage of the credit terms we give them.
Mhm.
At the point where they're like sitting in like the bad kids territory,
Yes.
maybe we won't now continue to like supply to them.
That, and how many times are you going to be calling me,
Yeah,
sending me emails? Eventually, it's going to strain our relationship, isn't it? 100%. So let's move forward. So here now, number one, working capital management effectiveness, liquidity. Okay. You cannot discuss working capital management without looking at liquidity. Okay. Concerns the availability of cash to meet short-term obligations. Okay. It measures the entity's ability to pay its short-term obligations as they fall due. Okay, liquidity is measured using the current and quick ratio. Okay, we've seen these before, and I'm sure you guys even got tired of me saying, but what does that mean? Interpret it for me. Okay, cash flow forecasting. Okay, this is basically what we call budgeting, right? You cannot have effectiveness in this space when it comes to working capital without forecasting. Because basically you're saying we anticipate that we're going to need to buy this amount of inventory. We anticipate that this is how much inventory is currently being used of raw materials. So this is how much we're going to need on this specific day. So therefore we need X amount of rands in the bank to go and buy these. Or we need access to creditors, all right, that we can buy on credit with in order to fund this, then the third. Okay. It provides an indication of a company's future required level of investment in working capital. The aircon doesn't work in this venue, ne? Yeah, I did the same. That's not. I found it on 26. So the one was on 26,018. Yeah, ne? So, have you guys seen this? The operating cycle. The operating cycle. So the operating cycle is basically measures the number of days cash is tied up in working capital. Okay. Remember, we said working capital is your current liabilities and your current assets. All right. The difference between the two. So here you can see, and explain it just by looking at this diagram. We go and purchase things on credit from our suppliers. Okay. Or we can purchase it in cash. But either way, our goods is, sorry, we now have inventories. We obviously take some time to sell our inventory. Okay, so inventory days. Okay, supplier paid in cash. Okay, and then we have credit sales to customers. Okay, and we also have some cash sales at the same time. Okay, then it takes some time for us to receive our credit sales, the cash owed from our credit sales, and then we obviously have cash from our customers. Okay, so this cycle is literally then saying, how long does it take us to turn our trading inventory into cash? Okay. Up top it says it accounts the time taken from the purchase of inventories from suppliers on credit to the receipt of cash from customers. And every business that sells inventory is always trying to make that operating cycle as short as possible. Okay, that's the whole objective of the game. So you are studying these different components and saying, how can I shorten the accounts receivable days, right? So that I can get my cash faster. How can I, we often try to lengthen the accounts payable days, okay? So that we find ourselves in a situation where our customers are paying back our creditors and we are not short for cash. Okay. So yeah. Anyway, so ID is inventory days. So to calculate your inventory days, It's your average inventory divided by average inventory. Remember, we would say last year's inventory, this year's inventory divided by 2, and then divided by your cost of sales times 365. Then ARD is your accounts receivables days, okay? And then APD, I think we called it something different when we were in, when we were doing 2A, but it's the same thing. So I think we called it debtors average collection days or period, something like that. And same thing, creditors average collection period or days or something to that effect. So cash conversion cycle measures the number of days between the time cash is paid to suppliers and the time cash is collected from customers. Okay, the CCC reflects the company's investment in working capital measured in days. Okay, so be careful. Operating cycle is different from your cash conversion cycle. Okay, just be mindful of that. Okay, the formula for your cash conversion cycle, and this is what I was talking about earlier, Nadia, when I was saying is, and remember, we don't just say, here's the formula, give us the answer. We can give you and say, no, we want to find out what is your operating cycle. And then we give you the accounts payable and the cash conversion cycle, for instance, okay? So you now need to know, okay, if I use that formula and then I get this variable, and then I'll be able to finally calculate your operating cycle, etc., etc.
The two formulas are the same.
Yes, these are two formulas for the same thing. For the same thing. Yo. Let me just. Everybody is contacting me. There's this guy. Right. So where were we? Think point. Okay. Inventories and accounts receivable. Accounts receivable represent the resources tied up in the OC. Why do we say that? Inventories and accounts receivable represent the resources tied up in the operating cycle. What do we want at the end of the day as a business? Profit. In other words, we want to make money. So we don't buy inventory for the sake of buying inventory. We buy inventory because we believe these are goods demanded by the customer. Does that make sense? So the end goal is not inventory. Also, when we make sales on credit, that's not the end goal. The end goal is when they come and they pay us. So can you see why we say these are resources tied up in the operating cycle? Because we're saying we want cash. Remember the saying, cash is king, isn't it? So at the end of the day, if we have put money into, okay, and money being our own money, and also cash on credit that we then obviously owe to our suppliers. That's why we look at inventories and accounts receivables as tied up resources. Deducting your average, so your accounts payable days reduces the number of days resources are tied up in your operating cycle, okay? A company's investment in working capital and CCC will increase if the company increases its level of inventories, okay, and accounts receivables, and decreases its accounts payable. Why? And I think we're all going to need to read that a second time. Why is that statement true? A company's investment in working capital and triple C will increase. That's the statement. If what happens? Increases its level of inventories and accounts receivables and decreases its accounts payables. The last bit is the critical bit. Because if we decrease the time that we are paying our creditors, who is then paying the money to the creditors if we have increased the number of days and level of inventory? Because that means that our debtors are paying us later, isn't? But we are paying our creditors sooner. So who has to fork out that money? Business. So can you see we are increasing our investment into working capital?
Like mathematical standpoint, and also like.
Yes, even from a mathematical standpoint. Yes, it makes perfect sense. Okay. Right. Just as days. Right. Okay, so here now, cash conversion cycle funding, cash conversion cycle funding. Okay, so you got two types of funding. You got permanent funding, and then you've got seasonal funding. Okay, so when we're talking about permanent funding, we're talking about long-term funding, and we're saying we just borrow a huge chunk of money. Let's just say, hey, we forecasted that over the next 2 years, if demand stays as is, we'll need 2 million to fund our working capital. That should suffice for our working capital needs. Then we have seasonal, right? This is us borrowing depending on our financial needs. So it's almost like an as and when, okay? So obviously that funding is more, it could be more short-term oriented, okay? So now they speak to the funding strategies. Based on that, you've got conservative. Conservative is us just saying, let's just borrow 2 million one shot for the long term. Whereas aggressive is where we say, we will borrow for the long term, but also borrow as and when funds become needed. Okay. So that is the aggressive. And I think another thing to highlight is with the conservative, it's cheaper. Because I've borrowed the 2 million. Maybe let me just read it. This is the cheapest way of funding and less risky because the company benefits from a permanent source of funding, availability, and fixed interest rates. Okay. And then when it comes to the aggressive, this strategy attracts risk as the company may be exposed to fluctuating short-term interest rates and limitations in funding availability. Okay, so make sure that you understand those the means of funding, and then obviously, or let me say the funding requirement, seasonal and permanent, and then obviously the strategies, conservative and aggressive. Okay, conservative and aggressive. Then here they say managing the cash conversion cycle, having a high inventory turnover rate. This is what we want. Okay, high inventory turnover rate means what? We are selling stock faster. Okay, so this will improve minimizing the time taken to convert raw materials into finished goods and minimizing the time taken to sell finished goods to customers. The company must ensure that it does not run into inventory shortages that will result in lost sales. Okay, so that's the downside to this. Obviously, if you're moving your inventory quite quickly, you just need to make sure that you always have inventory available for purchase. Then reducing the accounts receivable collection period. Okay. In other words, saying you can borrow for 40 days instead of 60 days. This will improve minimizing the time between credit sales to customers and the conversion of these sales into cash through collections from customers. I'm sure it's pretty straightforward. The less time we give people to pay us, the more money we have in cash a lot sooner. The company must ensure that its collection strategies are not overly aggressive. All right, this is where we start to create tension in the relationship, calling people too much, right? Such that it loses customers. All right, so you have to strike a balance between making sure customers are aware that their payments are falling due and obviously maintaining you being their chosen supplier of whatever goods you are selling, right? Otherwise, people will just say, I'm done with buying from this enterprise. I'm not going to shop at Macro or wherever else. Okay. Then here, delaying the payment of accounts payable for as long as possible. Okay. This involves maximizing the time between the credit purchase and payment of outstanding amounts to suppliers. Okay. Theoretically, this is very easy. It's very straightforward. But in the real world, it's not always as easy to just say, can we have more time to pay? But remember, your creditors or your suppliers are also a business. So they too need to manage their working capital. Okay. The company must ensure that it does not compromise its relationship with its suppliers or damage its credit rating by employing this strategy. Okay. Everything in business is about relationships. Okay. Now here they begin to talk about inventory management. But should we take a break before we go on? Yeah. I think let's take a quick 10-minute break. So then if we can be back by 5:02, we'll just quickly finish off these slides. After we finish off the slides, we will then jump into question 3.5. Yes, only on Friday. We start. But we might actually start on Thursday. We'll see how far we get with your test. I don't think it will take us longer than one session. So I think we should start earlier.